is our annual financial trend monitoring presentation. The point of this evening is really to set the table for the upcoming fiscal 17 budget cycle. Now, the question was asked just as we were all settling down, why does this meeting take place at this time of the year? And the reason for that is we have just closed out and audited our fiscal 15 budget. So we have the auditors just came in at the last selectmen's meeting. We know what our free cash is. Now on November 23rd, we set the tax rate and finalized the fiscal 16 budget. And we are right now in the process of preparing our fiscal 17 budget. So when you look at at what point do you sit down and start to talk about what do you see, in other words, for setting the table for fiscal 17, the second or third week in December is actually the perfect time to do that. I see this meeting, as I do every year, as one of the most important meetings that we have during the course of the year, on par, in my opinion, with town meeting, because this is a chance, not in the throes of the budget or policy decisions, to get together as a group, both from the Board of Selectmen, Financial Planning, Appropriations, and the School Committee, to get a chance to see, how did we finish out the last fiscal year? Where are we in the current fiscal year? And if we shake the snow globe, what are we seeing coming for the upcoming fiscal 17? In terms of the agenda tonight, as I said, we're really setting the table for the upcoming budget process. We're going to do that by reviewing the financial trend indicators for any significant changes since the last time we met in December of 2014. We're also going to look at the 5-year financial projections to see what are we looking at as we look. We look backwards from a trend analysis standpoint, typically 10 years, and we look forward 5 years to see what do we anticipate coming. One of the things that we also have started to do, because unlike many communities in Massachusetts, we are not at the limits of Proposition 2.5. And by that I mean many communities, when they look at their revenues, the first place they do is they take their tax levy, they go up by the maximum allowable under Prop 2.5, and then they estimate the balance of their revenues, and that's what they can spend. For us, because we've been so conservative with our budgeting over the last 6 and 7 years, we have $2.3 million in levy capacity. And before anybody gets too excited about that, in order to access that, you have to raise taxes. So we've been very careful about the tax impact. We've been very measured in what we've seen for increases in taxes over the last 8+ years. So because we have that levy capacity, we really want to take the time to look at whatever spending plan that we have, what is going to be that tax impact. And then really the best part of the meeting is as we go through and we identify trends where there are maybe problems emerging or opportunities before us, it's a chance for us to speak as policy group, the town's policy-making boards and committees, to talk about what are the opportunities there, what are some things that we might want to think about doing, if not now, in the future. One of the things that we pride ourselves on in Northborough is that we have consistently gotten out ahead of issues and problems. It's one of the reasons why we made it through the recession so well, and we continue to do very well as a community. Doesn't mean that we do not have fiscal constraints and challenges. All municipalities have constraints and challenges, but if we communicate those early and we plan accordingly, we can minimize the impacts, minimize the negative impacts. Just by way of review, we talk about financial condition. In a broad brush, it's our ability to maintain our existing level of services, to withstand local and regional disruptions, things like reductions in state aid when that happens, or slowdown in the economy, and also to be able to meet the natural demands of natural growth and decline. So more kids in the schools, more seniors, things of that nature. It allows us to, we want to be able to respond to those levels of service demands. And if you're able to do all that, most people would say you have a good financial condition. I'm not going to go through, I should start by mentioning last year at this time, we went through every single indicator in great detail. It is not my intention to do that this year. If there are viewers at home or people in the audience that nobody at the table is new, so you've been at this for several years. But if somebody at home or watching this on local access sees this, I strongly encourage you to go to the December 10th of 2014 financial trend monitoring presentation, where we went through all of the indicators in great detail. My intention is not to do that tonight. My intention is to move through the indicators fairly quickly, particularly ones that are favorable, have been favorable for several years, and we don't see any indication at all that they may be turning. So I want to focus on really the things that are in motion that are worth us having a good discussion with tonight. But this is one of the slides, again, budgetary solvency. Are we finishing out the year in the black with free cash? That's usually where most people focus. One of the benefits of this process that we have in Northborough is that we focus the policy-making boards and committees on the long-run solvency and the service-level solvency. And that's more of a holistic perspective in terms of how well you're doing in terms of your financial condition. I told you I was going to move quickly. I'm going to begin with the end in mind here. And this slide that's up right now is from the executive summary of the financial trend monitoring report, which, by the way, everybody has a hard copy here. You also have a copy of the presentation. In your budget in January, or March rather, when we print the final budget document, you'll get it again as part of that document. And any changes that are made between now and then will be updated. But I wanted you to have all the detail tonight, particularly since I'm not going to go through each of the indicators in detail. But this summary is a great snapshot, and I love to look at this because this is your dashboard in terms of what's happening in Northborough. And you can see the indicators that are in green, marked favorable, are favorable. The ones in red that are marked unfavorable are the ones we're probably going to spend a little bit of time talking about tonight. And then you have a few other ones in black that are either stable or uncertain. In other words, they haven't tipped over to something to be a positive or a negative trend, but it's something that maybe we want to watch. So, the first three indicators, property taxes, our collection rate, and our revenues and expenditures per capita, these are all favorable. Our tax base is strong, our collections are strong, and we have consistently finished our year end in the black. So those are all positive indicators, as they have been for the last several years. State aid, we'll talk about. We'll also talk about pension liability, OPEB, and our pavement management plan. So I'm going to skip through, and I'm going to hit upon the ones that are really in motion. But if anybody has any questions about any of the indicators that I've moved through quickly, just stop me. I'm happy to answer them. All right. This is a slide you guys have all seen. This is a slide regarding state aid right out of the budget. It's also a chart that I show at town meeting every year. And so when people look at this, and you know what this is, these are the recessionary periods. This is the one that we're in right now. We're in year 7 of it, year fiscal 16. And so you can see in nominal dollars that we haven't even got back to where we were back in 08. More importantly, we haven't gotten back to where we were overall, the all-time high for state aid in 2003. I'm using this as an example of indicators because when you look at this, what does that trend look like to you folks right here? What is that? Most people would say it's a positive trend, right? State aid is improving. When we talk about fiscal indicators, this is our state aid indicator. And what we're doing is we're showing state aid as a percentage of our operating revenues. And when you look at it in this form, and you control for inflation, but really just the fact that you're looking at it as a percentage of your revenues, you see in 08 here, 11.4%. That is a straight down to 9.1%. So overall, the revenues for Northborough, the percentage of revenues that are state aid, are down. And they've been consistently going down as a percentage of our budget. That is a negative trend for us. So despite the fact that we're seeing a 1.5% increase in state aid, most people think negative means things are literally moving in a negative direction. This is a negative trend because our budgets are increasing 3.5%. If state aid's only going up 1 or 1.5, you're getting this trend. It's becoming a smaller portion of our budget. And it's an unstable portion of our budget because it's not based on linear regression analysis, 6-year moving averages. It's not a mathematical process to figure out what your state aid's going to be. It's a political one, and it blows with the winds on Beacon Hill. So, for instance, in fiscal 15, we were talking about, we saw the state revenues were going up 5%, and we were looking potentially at a reduction in our state aid based on how the political process was moving forward. So I just want to show you in a couple of spots some of the things when we look at them from a budgetary standpoint versus these indicators. You can see we're maybe not going in as strong of a direction sometimes as it appears on the surface. So let's look at another one. This is something, a graph that comes right out of our tax classification hearing. These are our historic new growth numbers, and it's 10-year history. This mustard colored right here, that's residential property, new residential property, and it's primarily Avalon Bay, 382 units up by the mall. And then this beige color right here, that's new growth for essentially the commercial, which is Northborough Crossing. So you see these historic levels, 92, $80+ million in new growth. And then look what's happened the last 3 years. So if you look at that, you think to yourself, that looks like a negative trend, right? Our new growth has dropped off. Now, we don't anticipate that this was going to go on forever. New growth is a cyclical thing. But this is something we need to watch. But it looks like a negative trend, but it's not really a negative trend. It's something to be looking at. When we look at new growth or we look at economic development revenues, we look at them as a percentage of operating revenue, just like state aid. And you can see here, it's bounced around through the last 9 years or so. A low of 6.9, a high of 8.8, 8.4. But look at the last 2 years. It's gone down a little bit. But when you look across this whole time period, it's fluctuating. It's not a solid trend of it's going down. Now, what we want to talk about, and we gave the warning about this, we know our new growth has been down the last couple of years. Everything that made us successful in the past several years through the recession, and that is a preferential business climate in terms of preferable tax rate for businesses. We don't charge any surpluses. We have a streamlined budgeting process, and we have what you can't manufacture, and that's a tremendous location being at the crux of 495 and the Mass Pike. All the things that made us successful over the years, those are all still there, and none of that has changed. But what you do see is cycles where you might get a large amount of development, and then there's a little bit of a pause, and then you get your next surge. I should mention the other thing that we have is we have available land for development. Some towns are completely built out. That's not the case in Northborough. So despite the fact that we're seeing this trend right here for new growth, overall, when you look at it in the context of our indicator, you can see it's bouncing around. It's something we want to be cognizant of, and we certainly want to watch it, but I wouldn't classify it as a negative trend at this point. If this continues for several more years, where we see new growth really going down, and we see our economic development revenues not bouncing back up in this normal cycle or this normal rhythm, then we want to be focused on that. So it's something to watch, but I wouldn't raise the alarm bell just yet. Personnel costs. This is one to keep in mind. So what we have here are personnel expenses as a percentage of the budget. And if you see here, it averages about 60%, very, very steady, very stable. So it has been steady here for quite some time, certainly since the recessionary period, primarily because we haven't done what, guys? What haven't we done to drive personnel costs up? We haven't hired. There's been very, very little hiring, a position here or there that's desperately needed, but we haven't hired a lot of folks. The other piece of it is, in terms of personnel costs, when you look at this little red sliver here, those are your employee benefits. They were 10.4% back in fiscal 10. They've actually been declining, and that's because we've done some things with our health insurance to keep it affordable. Now, the fact that you see this bumping up to 10.2% right here, That is simply because we are now putting money aside for our OPEB unfunded liability. So, when you look at these trends, it's important to understand why. It's going up ever so slightly, but it's going up because not because our costs are going up. It's going up because we're finally taking care of and funding an unfunded liability. That's a positive thing. So think of this: if you were comparing us to another community, would they be doing better than us by avoiding that expense? It's kind of like comparing yourself to your next door neighbor. You're putting money into your retirement fund and they're not. It's an expense and you want to make sure that you're aware of it, but it's a different kind of expense because you're dealing with an unfunded liability. You're not just generating recurring operational costs. So this is one that, despite the fact it's edged up a little bit, again, not a negative trend. I see it as very positive, the fact that we're dealing with these unfunded liabilities. Again, employee benefits, when you look at employee benefits, 19.6, and it's up a little bit. The only reason why it's up is because we're including those OPEB costs as part of that. So as far as the recurring operational expenses for personnel and benefits, still very steady, still very manageable. Pension liability is one of the unfavorable indicators that we talked about during the summary section. And it's unfavorable. You go back to 2001 where we were 74% funded, then it dropped down. Remember the recession? Everybody remembers the stock market losing 30% plus in value. All those things happen. So the thing about pension, unfunded pension liability, for Northborough, it's about $20 million. And that doesn't include the teachers. The teachers are paid for by the state. So this is just a Worcester County regional. The reason it's unfavorable is the fact that it's $20 million. In terms of the outlook, we have it as improving for a couple of reasons. We have it improving because a couple things have occurred. The Worcester Regional Retirement has put it on a full funding schedule, which means we're paying increased assessments so that we will be fully funded by the year 2035. By statute, we have to be fully funded by 2040. So it's actually on a bit of an accelerated plan. Interestingly enough, the last time we were out for a bond rating, Moody's called out the fact that we had unusually low pension liability, which when we look at it, we think, boy, that's significant. But relative to municipalities across the country, it's actually pretty good. There was also pension reform that occurred a couple years ago that is helping. And then last but not least, as you all know, as you watch the stock market and what's happening, overall the economy is improving. As the economy improves, the investments for that retirement system, the values go up. That helps the funding ratios. So yeah, it's unfavorable, but it's improving. And the most important thing for this body to take away is there's nothing for you folks to do. It's not a policy decision for you. It gets handled at the regional retirement system. And through our representatives, in terms of June, our finance director, we let them know we want to see this thing on an accelerated funding schedule. And so that's actually happening. So again, overall, it's not favorable, but it's improving and there's nothing more for us to do. Now, OPEB liability, on the other hand, does fall to us, right? This is something that we are responsible for. And again, this is one of the other unfunded liabilities that is shown on our indicators as being unfavorable. But we also have this one as improving. And the reason why we have it improving is beginning in fiscal 15, we started putting aside $500,000 a year into our OPEB trust fund. And this is other post-employment benefits, primarily health insurance for retirees. This includes the general government employees as well as the schools. The fact that we have put into our base budget $500,000 in 15, we've also done it again in fiscal 16, and I will tell you, no matter what happens in the fiscal 17 budget, we will put another $500,000 in because we have to keep working this number down. So again, it's a big number, $34 million. However, it is improving. We continue to lobby the state for, much like we had pension reform, we continue to lobby the state for OPEB reform to change the manner in which these benefits get accrued so that it's more like pension where based on your age and your years of service, you get an increasing percentage of retiree health benefits. You can't just come here for 10 years working 20 hours a week and have health benefits for the rest of your life. And by the way, just so we're clear on this one, folks, outside of funding our liability, putting money into the trust fund, that is up to us. But in terms of the rules for how you obtain these benefits, that is the legislature that has to fix that. And we've lobbied them every year to change that for the last several years. So if and when some OPEB reform occurs, that will help our number. Every year that we put $500,000 away, it's going to earn interest. That's going to help our number. So again, in terms of financial trends, it's unfavorable, but we are better off than the vast majority of municipalities. Our auditor was in at our December 14th meeting, and he said there's maybe 24 communities in the state out of 351 that have done anything meaningful in the way of OPEB, and we're one of them. That's a good place to be, ahead of the curve. Debt service, we saw this decline right here, a planned decline as the high school debt was paid off. Fiscal 16, it's up a little bit. It's up because Lincoln Street, right? So $7.5 million was bonded for our Lincoln Street building project. In fiscal 17, the other half of that funding, that debt will be issued. In fact, on Monday, we have our bond rating call with Moody's. Now, the big success story for the town of Northborough is when we went out for the first half of the project cost, which is $7.5 million. We got a very, I wouldn't say a pleasant, it wasn't a surprise because we worked very hard. And by we, I mean everybody in this room. We got a bond upgrade. Went from a AA2 to a AA1. That's as high of a bond rating as we're going to see in Northborough. And we estimate that it probably saved the town roughly about $780,000 over the life of $14.85 million in debt versus the number we were carrying. We issued permanent bonds at 2.49%. That's the lowest rate in our history. Now, I was talking with Tom Spataro just before we started the meeting about the Federal Reserve. We all know they raised interest rates 25 basis points, or 0.25%. We're hoping that when we get out back in the market for the second half of our project, that we believe some amount of rate increase is sort of baked into that rate. So we're not anticipating that we're going to get 25 basis points higher. We think it'll be less than that. Regardless, the fact that we have managed our debt well, the fact that we have managed our finances and our financial condition so well, that's why our bond rating was upgraded. That's why we got the lowest interest rates in our history, and that's why it's showing here as favorable. So it is going to increase. We know as we bring in fiscal 17, it's going to go up a little bit more. Our policy is to keep debt service between 5 and 10% of our expenditures, and right now we're hovering around 5%, so we're really kind of at the floor. It's a good place to be. A lot of other communities, you see them issuing a lot of debt. As you know, we pay cash for all small equipment. We even pay cash for some large equipment. And by doing that, we've reduced our debt service down, and we've made room in our budget to do real projects like Lincoln Street. Reserves are favorable. They're hovering around 8%. We know that in fiscal 15, we actually put $200,000 into our stabilization fund, which is our rainy day fund. We're anticipating right now that we're probably going to advocate to put another $200,000 in this year in fiscal 17, just to maintain those reserves. Now, we haven't taken anything out of our reserves, so why is the percentage going down? Well, the budget's increasing 3 or 4%, and you're not adding to those reserves. And of course, the interest rates are low, so you're not earning any income. So as a percentage, it's declining. The fact that we've maintained those reserves was cited by Moody's as one of the primary reasons for our upgrade. So as we're going back out into the market again in January, is it January, June? Is it January, June, Hubbard Ward, not is it January or June of fiscal 16? We're going to be going back out again. So we want to make sure that we're sending a clear message to the bond market that we're in good shape and that our reserves are going to be very strong. These are fixed assets. We know we're doing well in fixed assets. The last one that's unfavorable out of the indicators I do want to touch upon is our pavement management plan, because something has changed since our meeting last year. Now, if you recall, we have done a comprehensive pavement management plan, which means we've assessed every road in town, we've rated them, and we've given them different priority ratings in terms of their condition and when they need to be resurfaced or repaired. This is a series of financial decisions that we need to make. And if we only use our Chapter 90 money, which is transportation bond funds, the state issues a debt and they provide the money to the communities to do road work. We used to get about $475,000. Last year we got $492,000. So that's that yellow line, or that red line right there. If we only invest that, our index goes from a 70 down to a 63. Now, just like I got some people from the school department here, it's just like your grades, right? A 70 is average, 63, D minus, you're close to failing, right? Same index applies to our roads. And so what we want to do is we really want to be on this blue graph right here, which is overall in the next 10 years, the average index will go from 70 to an 80. That would require $2 million a year. We don't have $2 million a year. So like everything that we do when we identify a need or a problem, we try to find the middle course to stem the bleeding, find a way to not have the problem get worse while hopefully everything else gets better and you can find additional resources. Stem the bleeding for us to maintain that is $1.1 million. Now, oddly enough, I was so excited last year when I was able to tell you folks that we have money in the budget, $300,000 appropriated, and that we had funding for Chapter 90 at the state level after years of lobbying through the Mass Municipal Association. They increased from $200 million to $300 million statewide. What does that mean for Northborough? It means our local funding for road work goes from $492 to about $744. So between our local appropriation and that increased Chapter 90, oh man, we were just shy of 1.1 million, which means our plan was not only a good plan, but it was actually going to be implemented. You saw a tremendous amount of paving occur around this town. We did some full paving, about 7 major roads in town. We have crack sealing and some patching work being done in about 20 other roads. It's the biggest push in infrastructure, roadway infrastructure investment that we've seen in the last 20 years. And our goal was to maintain that. Well, as Elaine will remind me every time, don't count on our friends at the state. Unfortunately, they raised that 1 year, and what did they do to us the next year? They said, well, you got extra money last year, so we're going to go back to 200,000. So what does that mean? What does that mean? So we have roughly, 492,000. We have still in the budget for 16, $300,000 for our part of the plan expense, which means in total we got about 700,000 or so, just shy of 800,000, not 1.1 million. So I already know, standing here today, we're not going to make this graph. Now, 1 year we can survive. Multiple years, if the state doesn't bring that back up, we're going to have to reevaluate our plan, and we're either going to have to accept that we're more between the green line and the red line, or we're going to have to identify some other revenue sources and make another appropriation to back that up. So, I was so excited last year. Very rarely do you identify a major problem. You study it, and then you come forward and you have a plan that's truly viable on a recurring basis. But we'll see what happens with the Chapter 90 money coming forward in 17. I'd like to hope that the state will come back and go back to 300 million. That would fund our plan again. But if we see a delay for multiple years, it means the plan that we put together, that we worked so hard on together, is going to be off track, and we're going to need to talk about that. So again, and just in terms of the indicators, I'm happy to go back to any of the indicators I moved over quickly. Again, I didn't talk in great detail about the ones that are all clearly favorable. They've been favorable for years. There's no indication that there's an issue. Incidentally, when you look at this list, you know, unfavorable, we don't control that. Pension liability, we don't control that. OPEB, we do control it, but let's all be honest, it wasn't even on anybody's radar until the Government Accounting Standards Board required all municipalities to start measuring that. And so as soon as we measured it and we identified it, we put together a plan for funding it. So we're good there. And the last one, the capital investment on pavement management, we just talked about. We had a plan, but this is why you have these meetings. This is why you go through this process, because when things get off track, you have to have a discussion about, are you going to allow them to stay off track due to other priorities, or are you going to circle back and find a way to fix that and to patch it together so that you're back on track to where it is you say you want to go. Before I move on off the indicators, does anybody have any questions about anything that I just covered? No, and I would imagine you do, since this is probably your fourth time going through this. And again, we haven't seen a lot of changes, but I know it makes me feel comfortable that at least once annually, as a group, we're sitting down and we're looking at this information, and we're all agreeing that we're seeing the same things, that we're on track where we're on track, and we know we have either an issue, an opportunity in an area or two, and that we're clear about what we're doing, and more importantly, if we're not doing something, why are we not doing something? That's all very important. So from here, just summarizing, you know, we're in great financial condition on a relative basis. One thing I did not mention earlier, but we talked about in the tax classification hearing, is our tax base is very strong. It's growing, $2.5 to $2.6 billion. It's up about $55 million from last year. But it's also very diverse. We're not one of the communities where we have one company or one industry that dominates our local economy, which means if somebody has trouble and they go under, we're not really beholden. If you think about what's our single biggest taxpayer in town right now? They make great food. You probably go there to go do some Christmas shopping after tonight. It's the Northborough crossing, right? That's our single biggest taxpayer. Now within that mall, you've got diverse stores, right? So you have diversity within that single taxpayer. It's not as though it's it's not 3M or digital that are just going to disappear overnight. And once you go below that number one top taxpayer, you've got manufacturing, you've got healthcare, you have utilities. It's a broad spectrum, and that tax base continues to grow. Our financial reserves, as I said, are healthy, cited by Moody's as being one of the reasons why we received the upgrade. Our debt level's manageable. Our bond rating is the best we've ever had in the history of the town right now. Our financial condition is strong, and I think a third-party independent assessment, which is Moody's, verified what we say, which is we're in good financial condition. They say you're in better financial condition than you were before the recession, and you warrant an upgrade. Reliance on one-time revenues, as you know, we cap it basically at 1%. Our pay-as-you-go capital investments continue, $5.8 million from fiscal 12 to fiscal 16 in pay-as-you-go capital with free cash. If you want to count all the pay-as-you-go capital and other sources like community preservation and grants, we're up around $9.6 million in capital that we did not add debt service for. We did not add a tax impact or an additional tax impact for. And that's huge, because when you look around, you see all the DPW trucks, you see the new fire engine, you know, you see all of these improvements, boilers at the schools, in some cases roofs, new roofs at the schools. We're paying cash for all that stuff. That's tremendous. Very few communities are able to do that. The last one here, rising health insurance costs have been mitigated, at least for now. That's one of the things I do want to talk to you tonight when we get into what are we looking at for 17. Health insurance is an issue again for us. It's always on the desktop. We're always watching it, but it's at a point now where I think it's become an actionable item, and that's something we're going to talk about. Emerging concerns. There's really nothing new here. OPEB and pension liability, there are plans in place for both of them, but you still need to watch and reassess. Because as we come back each year, if our OPEB liability doesn't improve, if our pension liability doesn't improve, then we need to come back and say, we need to maybe take a different tact. We need to do something different here to start moving those trends in the right direction. Right now, both of them are moving in the right direction. Uncertainty surrounding state aid. The tough thing there, guys, is really when you look at state aid, their revenues have been coming back. They get a 5% increase in their state aid. And what trickles down to the localities? 1.5%. Again, we lobby, but we don't control that revenue source. The fact that it's so unpredictable from a political standpoint just means that we always have to maintain contingency funds in our reserves to make sure that if something happens at the state level, mismanagement or just the political winds, if our aid gets cut, we have a backup plan while we figure out a long-term strategy to how to deal with that shortcoming. Health insurance we'll talk about again. Economic development, it's cyclical, as I said. Right now we're in a down cycle, but as easy as next week, we can see a $20 or $30 million project. We have regular meetings with developers that are interested in coming to Northborough. There are times where in the last couple of months where I thought we were going to have a $20 or $30 million development come to Northborough. Unfortunately, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but when it comes to economic development, the state allows municipalities to offer tax increment financing agreements, essentially to give tax breaks to businesses. And sadly, we're really not desperate, are we? We have a prime location, we've got a preferential tax structure, and we have land available, right? There are a lot of communities that are desperate. Their taxes on businesses are high, or they can't attract people because they're not in a good location. They don't have a good workforce around it. And so they're willing to put 100% tax increment financing agreements together. And we have not engaged in a race to the bottom, but unfortunately I do think that as we look forward, one of the things that we're going to need to give serious thought to is that we're going to need to incentivize. You see a town like Westborough right next door to us, a very well-off community, benefits from the same location, a lot of the same things that benefit Northborough. They're issuing TIF agreements to get some biotech to come in. Some of the other neighboring communities are offering significant incentives. And as long as we hold fast, we've never really had to give an incentive. A big TIF for us was 5 years, 10%, something like that. What I'm seeing out there now, our competition, 15-year TIFs, minimum 10-year, preferably 15, starting well north of 50%. Just something to keep in mind that, if we see that economic development not come back, that means, one of the things from a policy standpoint, one of the discussions we'll need to have is how much do we want to incentivize that development as we look forward. Right now, I think we're good, but if we're going to be competing for the type of industry that folks want to see, like biotech, then I've yet to see a biotech firm locate in this state in the last 5 or 6 years that did not get a significant incentive from the locality. Something to think about. Long-run solvency surrounding infrastructure. We talked about, our road programs. We have to keep an eye on that, and we're going to need to find a way to get resources to our infrastructure, particularly our roadways. All right, setting the table for fiscal 17. What are the considerations, or what are the most important considerations? First and foremost, we have to stay the course on our OPEB funding. I've said that 5 times. It's worth saying 6 times. We can't abandon that. It's too easy to walk away from something like that when you see other competing constraints for an operational budget. That's how we're going to be in good financial condition and solvent 20 years from now. And it's just like your retirement. How many kids at 20, when they first start working, or 21, are really serious about saving for retirement, right? And what does the financial advisor tell you every time? Start early, no matter what you can put in, because it costs more to make it up later. OPEB is the same way. The earlier we start, the better off we are. We delay that, it's going to be something that grows to the point where it's not going to be manageable in the future. Sustainable personnel expenses. Contracts, I have contracts, staffing. The other thing that I'd add in here is health insurance. So we're up right now, the non-school departments are all up, 5 unions. We're in negotiations right now. So we're gonna need to negotiate a sustainable wage increase, just like we've been able to do for the last 7 or 8 years. We also completed major operational analysis and staffing reviews in police and fire, and we know, at least in fire, we've got some staffing needs. Well, when you think about what's the most difficult thing to add into an operational budget, it's staffing, right? There's a multiplier effect, and you all know it. When you looked at all the indicators, which were the ones that were in red and unfavorable? Health insurance, your pension, OPEB, health insurance. These are the things, every time you add a full-time body with benefits, that's the ripple effect that goes through your budget. There's a multiplier effect that happens. It's not just those wages, but it comes back, and even long-term in the form of OPEB, it comes back and you have to deal with it. So as we look at that, we need to make sure, look, I'm not saying we can't add staffing at all, or we're never going to add staffing. I think that's an extreme position that I'm not advocating for. But we do need to be very clear when appropriations and school committee, when you guys hear for the needs, and there's always needs, that whatever gets phased in very slowly, so that we know that the very slow recurring revenues are going to be able to support that. You add 4 or 5 positions any given year, it's not going to be sustainable, you're going to be in trouble. The other thing that I want everybody to be thinking about in fiscal 17, health insurance. The last 7 years, on average, our health insurance budget has gone up 2.51%. That's phenomenal. And it has its roots in the plan design changes we made back in fiscal 10 that we negotiated with all of our employee groups. And it was a win for everybody, and it was actually one of my proudest moments as a manager that we were able to get that done working with the employees. A lot of towns wound up fighting and in litigation and grievances. Our employees came to the table in good faith. And what we said to them was, we don't know how long we're gonna, these changes are gonna save us budgetarily, but we're gonna ride it out. Nobody thought it would go 7 years, particularly not me. Well, guess what? Every ride comes to an end, right? Last year, or fiscal 16, the year we're in right now, we got about, was it 3% increase in our health insurance budget, June? Thank you. We were looking at the GIC, the Group Insurance Commission for the state employees, and we were looking at all of our neighbors. GIC went up 9.2%. Many of our neighbors who made radical plan design changes in the last couple of years still saw 7, 8, 9, 10% increases. The market is moving back to those ugly increases. Besides the market moving back, our loss ratios, we watch these very carefully. Everybody know what a loss ratio is? I pay $100,000 in premium, and then the insurance company pays out $110,000 in claims. Say they pay out $80,000 in claims, and my premium is $100,000. I've got an 80% ratio, right? Or an 80. That's my index is 80%. If you start approaching 100%, or you go over it, you can pretty much guarantee, regardless of what the market's doing, you're going to get a significant increase. The market is moving at 8, 9%. Our loss ratios are in some cases 100 or 100%, 100% over. 100% or in excess of 100%. So every indication is we're looking at significant rate increases for our health insurance this year. It's a $4.9 million account, so a 10% increase in health insurance is roughly $500,000. That is what put us in crisis back in fiscal 2010. So what have we done about it? You wouldn't think I'd be drawing this out and telling you how bad it is if we didn't have a plan, right? Right. We have a plan. And our plan involves working collaboratively with all of our bargaining units, just like we did back in fiscal 10. That plan didn't start last week. That plan started when we saw what the market was doing back when we were preparing fiscal 16. We met with all of the employee groups and we said, guys, we caught a break. We squeaked by this year. We know next year is going to be difficult. As soon as town meeting was over, we met with the employee groups again over the summer. We showed them the information. We had some in-depth discussions. We've had multiple meetings through the fall with them as well. And what we're doing right now is we're going to make some additional plan design changes. We're talking to all the employee groups right now about doing that. Now, people look at us and they say, well, are you going to implement the legislative authority to just make arbitrary changes to plan design changes for your employees? We didn't do that in fiscal 10 because it wasn't available. We were one of the few communities that were able to do something about health insurance because most communities couldn't get their employees to come to the table. Every one of our bargaining units came to the table in good faith. I have every faith that all of our bargaining units are going to come to the table in good faith again, and we're going to be able to tweak plan design changes so that we don't see a 10% increase in fiscal 17. So that's something that we have literally been working on for the last year. It's not done. We're still in these discussions. But we've conveyed the same information to our employee groups that I just conveyed to you. And they know looking back now, that when we came to them in fiscal 10, the information was real, the approach was honest, and the compromise was in everybody's best interest. That's what we're going to do again. So as the fiscal 17 budget unfolds, expect to hear a lot more about health insurance. Because if we don't, I know that we're going to see some increases that are going to really cripple us moving forward. So again, getting back, we know less new growth, state aid, relatively flat. We need to plan for infrastructure. And this one here, this last bullet, there's a lot of magic in that last bullet. It says that all the decisions we're going to make are going to be in compliance with our agreed upon financial policies. You know, when people look at other communities and our tax increase might be going up a little bit more than maybe some of the other communities, and people look at me and they say, well, why isn't community X going up as quickly as us? I said, well, you got to look at everything that they're doing. If I were closer to retirement, I could give you 3, maybe 4 consecutive budgets in a row with almost no tax increase. I'd be building a house of cards. First thing I'd do is I'd use free cash and all those one-time monies, and I'd push the tax rate down, and I'd stop investing in infrastructure. The other thing I'd do is I'd stop putting money aside for OPEB. I have to pay pension. I can't stop that, but I stopped putting money aside for OPEB. I'd stop putting so much money in our buildings and our equipment. And then I'd institute tax classification. A tax of business is more than the residential. And you can do that for a few years, and then it catches up to you. You know, when you look at your neighbor, and sometimes I think to myself, boy, you know, I know what I make, I know what somebody else makes. I drive a 10-year-old Nissan Altima. Literally, I drive a 2006 Nissan Altima, right? I see other people with bigger cars, bigger houses, and things of that nature. What you don't know is, I know what my retirement looks like. I know how much I owe on my house. I also know I paid cash for that car, and I have no debt. You know, when you look at other communities, those are the things, and I know you folks are savvy enough to understand this, those are the things that you need to look at. So when you look at Northborough, we're investing in our capital, we're taking care of our unfunded liabilities, our debt service is very, very low. We've done all the things that we should be doing. So when we increase our budget or we add something to the budget or staff, you know that it's on a solid foundation. This is not a house of cards. That's not the case in all communities. If you pick up the paper today or yesterday, you'll see there are communities with hundreds of thousands of dollars of budget deficits that they're dealing with right now in fiscal 17 or fiscal 16. Never mind 17. That's not the case here, in part because we are very conservative and we're very deliberate, and we do not, at a moment's notice, just abandon our principles. You know, what's the hardest thing to do? You know, you stop putting money into your retirement, or to make that check and put money into your retirement when you'd rather spend it on a vacation, right? Hopefully you have a balance. Last piece of the presentation, just looking out. So that's sort of, the financial trend monitoring is looking back 10 years. What are we seeing happening? What's been our recent experience? Now we look forward 5 years, and it gives you pretty good context for fiscal 17, where we are preparing for right now. So we're going to talk about our 5-year projections, the assumptions that those projections are based upon, and then the thing everybody wants to know is really what are we looking at for tax impact. So in terms of our projections, it's a little bit different than you see in many communities. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, typically you figure out how much you can generate under Proposition 2.5 for a tax increase. Then you figure out what are you going to get in state aid, and then what do you have in local receipts and fines and fees, right? And then you figure out what you think your expenses are going to be, and the bottom line is either red or black. Either you're short or you have surplus. We're a little bit different because we're not taxing to the max of 2.5. So in theory, we can just keep raising taxes rather significantly to meet our spending needs. But we all know that the litmus test in local government is what is that tax bill doing? And we all have a feeling about what a reasonable increase is in that tax bill that will be tolerated by our community. So our model is sort of a little bit on its head in that we look at what do we need, and I work very closely with the superintendent. What do we need operationally to maintain the service level that we have right now? And we know that we need ideally 3.5 to 4%, but really 3.5 is sort of the bottom line that we need for a budget increase to maintain the level of services that we have in this community. When you start going below that, then you need to start making some value decisions about the level of services that you want to see. So we start with maintain a budget that's going to allow the schools and general government to maintain their level of services. And then we back into that the revenues and the taxes, and then we sit back and say, well, what does that look like, and is that something that is going to fly in our community? We focus really on the top 3 revenue sources: taxes, which is about 80%, state aid, and motor vehicle excise. The other 5% are building permit fees, liquor license fees, fines and penalties, things of that nature. But as I said, our goal in this model is to see what would it take to maintain our current level of services. In terms of the revenue assumptions, we do the allowable under 2.5. That doesn't mean necessarily eating right into all of the levy capacity, but the simple 2.5 calculation. We assume, as we talked about earlier, new growth is 30 million. Last 2 years, it's been 30 or 31 million. That used to be a conservative number. That's really, it's turned out last few years, that's actually been our number. It's really not that conservative anymore. But that generates about 515,000 in new taxes annually. We do say that levy capacity is on the table. If the goal is to maintain services and your state aid isn't increasing, your local receipts aren't increasing, then under this model, just like the one we presented last year, we open it up to dipping into that levy capacity. And we need to watch what that does to the taxes. Motor vehicle and miscellaneous receipts we assume are level funded. And again, as I said, the model does not rely on any one-time gimmicks. We're not suddenly using more one-time revenues or deferring capital or anything like that. We also assume that OPEB is going to get funded at $500,000, as we talked about. Health insurance, we're budgeting a 5% increase. In the next couple of years, I see that not as being not a very conservative number. We see that number can creep up on us, but for planning purposes right now, assuming we can make some plan design changes with our unions, I'm comfortable with that assumption right now. If we can't, that number needs to be revisited. It also assumes that Lincoln Street, the second half of the Lincoln Street School Building Project, about $7.3 million gets issued next year for fiscal 17. And then I know there's a lag between when we vote these things and when they actually hit our budget, but Assabet Valley's project, their renovation project, is completed, and they've been floating bond anticipation notes, which are interest only. Well, the permanent debt has come due, and in fiscal 17, it's hitting us, and it's $192,000 in fiscal 17. So that's coming into this model as well. And as I said, as far as the key budgets, K-8, general government, and Algonquin, beyond fiscal 17, fiscal 17 is assuming a 3.5% increase, and the out years are 4%. We're just modeling it to see what it looks like, and then it gives us something to talk about. So this is how it plays out, and you can probably see it a little bit more detail in your handouts. But everything that I just said, these numbers here for Algonquin. Here's the Assabet debt, 192 hitting for the first time. You can see what it's doing, 150, 145, 141. Still significant numbers. Lincoln Street school building, $1.1 million roughly over the next couple years. Now, despite the fact that our level of debt is down significantly, when you issue debt, you still have debt service. So it does have a tax impact, and we are clearly going to feel that in 16 and again in 17. As far as the other expenses, undistributed employee benefits, debt service, all of this stuff, there's the trust, the OPEB, 500,000. All that is in accordance with the assumptions that I showed you on the previous slide. On the revenue side, this is a little bit different. So these are our projected revenues. There's the $30 million in new growth, resulting in about $500,000 in additional revenue. There's a Prop 2.5 calculation. Debt exclusions are in here, high school debt exclusion, Lincoln Street. And by the way, the Lincoln Street, Algonquin is net of the money we're getting back, the $212,000 on an annual basis from Southborough for that adjustment. So the thing I want to draw your attention to is this big yellow line that goes through the middle. Based on all the assumptions and the modeling that I just described to you, now we have right now about $2.3 million in excess levy capacity. In other words, we could raise taxes by $2.3 million without going for an override. Now, I'm not saying that we want to do that. I'm just saying that we created that capacity with some conservative budgeting over the years, in part because we know the trend that's coming after that recession is going to be more significant budget increases, and we'll show you that in a moment. But look what happens. Based on the assumptions, maintaining level services for the schools in the town, that levy capacity goes from 2.3 to 2 to 1.4, 700. By 2021, you've eaten up all that levy capacity to maintain that level service. Now, let me be clear about something here before anybody panics. This is a very conservative model. This model assumes we're not going to get any significant economic development during that period. This model assumes that we're only going to see a 1% increase in state aid during that period. It assumes we're not going to see any local receipt increases during that period. And it assumes a 4% increase for budgets, which may not be realistic. So, is it bad news? No. Is it good news? No. It's just reality. And I brought, did we bring the mass taxpayers, Diane, did we bring the mass taxpayers article?
Yes.
Would you distribute that, please? I have something for you to read. It's from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, and it talks about exactly what we are looking at here tonight. It talks about essentially the days of 5 to 6% revenue increases year upon year, that those days are over, that we're seeing constraints more around the 3 to 4% range, and that there's a growing reliance on, do we have it?
They were in that box.
No, they're not in that box. Then I will get this article to you. I apologize for that. But the article basically goes on to say that municipalities are in this period of protracted, reduced, and constrained revenue streams. And that is I refer to it as chronic fiscal constraints. We're not declining, we're not growing very quickly, but we're seeing things like our state aid kind of deteriorating, from a high of 13% of our budget to 9.1%. Well, what are you making that up with? You're making it up the same thing that every municipality in Massachusetts is making it up with: taxes. If you want to maintain services, there's only so many places to go. So the article talks about the things that municipalities need to watch, and they say you should do something about your health insurance, and you should watch your head count, because your head count is going to add to your budget base, and it's going to ripple through your health insurance, your OPEB, and your pension, right? All the things we talked about tonight. No mystery here, nothing we haven't been talking about for the last several years. So that's what we're looking at. So can things improve? Can we get better revenues? Can we get more economic development? Can state revenues come up? Can we get more state aid? All that, absolutely. This assumes a pretty conservative outlook. Now, what we have at our disposal that most communities don't is that levy capacity. And I know it seems like a lot of money, but you can see here, based on the assumptions that we just went through, you can eat that levy capacity up in just a few years. That's a little bit of a pressure valve that we have. But if you just keep digging into it, it'll be gone very quickly. And once it's gone for good. So let's talk about how this shakes out in terms of the tax impact. So we use fiscal 16 now that that budget is set as the base year, and then we project out 5 years off of that. And something that we did different this year that I want to draw your attention to is, now normally we leave the average single family home value steady when we do this analysis. Well, if you look back prior to the recession, the average single family home was valued at $375? No, it was $432. That was a test, June. First time you had the wrong answer.
That was the low, the wrong question.
At the peak of the real estate market, the average single family home in Northborough was valued at $432,000, right? That, during the most recent recession and the housing bubble popping, went down $56,000, or about 13%, okay? So as that single family home value went down, and we had a lot of commercial industrial development, we saw a natural shifting of the tax burden. So the tax bills for those years were actually quite reasonable, weren't they? On average for 5 years, $98. Excellent. And during a time when we were doing a lot of building projects and so forth. Well, when that bottomed out, we're seeing home values starting to come back. So in fiscal 16, the average single family home appreciated in value about 3%. In fiscal 16, the one we're in right now, we just finished a 3-year reval, right? Average single family home went up another 3%. So that's 6%. So we said, look, that's the trend that we're seeing. So building into our models, we have to assume that over the next 5 years, we're probably going to pick up another 5 or 6% as those home values come back. Now, doesn't mean they have to hit that peak that they did. A lot of people would say they were overvalued at the time, but clearly, single home values are going to increase. And unless we see economic development, the taxpayers, the single family home taxpayers are gonna feel a big chunk of that brunt. So in fiscal 17, as we look out, there's a $307 increase. Now keep in mind, somewhere around, somewhere just shy of $100 is the Lincoln Street school building impact, right? So the budgets we already said are looking at 3.5% or less in terms of their increase. But Lincoln Street debt is hitting, but home values are appreciating. Now, just to put this in perspective, when we did the classification hearing, if the average single family home goes up by 3%, it's about $10,000 to $12,000 in value. If you apply the tax rate to that, just the fact that your home is worth $10,000 or $12,000 more is about $195 increase in your tax bill. Now, I love having this conversation with taxpayers because most people think, it's great when your asset appreciates. Well, it's great if you're going to cash out and you're going to take that money, but if you're not going anywhere, it means your home value is up, which is a positive thing. But unless you're going to sell, you're not going to realize that value. What you are going to realize is an increased tax bill based on that. So that is the market dynamic that is coming into play. And what we did in this model, which we didn't in the one we showed you last year, is we added a 1% for fiscal 17 and then a 1.5% increase in this average single family home value, getting back to close to the 432,000, 427,000 in this model. I think we need to acknowledge the fact that the housing market is going in that direction, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if your budgets are going up at a very reasonable 3% rate. If the market's appreciating and the market is shifting such that commercial industrial isn't growing or it's depreciating, then the residential taxpayers are going to feel that more strongly. We did find the MTA article. If you look at the very bottom, it's a double-sided copy. Look at the very bottom of the first page, what I underlined for you. It's exactly what we talked about. So I knew we had that article.
Took it out of the box so it wouldn't get wet.
So, I'm not going to read the article to you. I'm not asking you to read it right now. But that is the fiscal reality from an overall economic standpoint of, what we're seeing. We're not seeing anything different or unique in Northborough that isn't being seen across the state. Some communities are doing one-time gimmicks and things to try to mask the trends that we just talked about. But when you lay them all right out, this is what they look like. And right now, this is where we've been. So from here to here, from 2007 to 2010, we've seen the average single-family home tax bill went up about $218, $220. There's the recession from 2010 up to really 15 in this area here. You saw the tax bill go up on average about $98. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly what's going to happen, but I am telling you that based on the assumptions, if we don't get more state aid, if we don't see more economic development from commercial industrial, and if we want to maintain our current level of services in the schools and the general government, that you're going to start seeing a trend that looks more like this. But the thing that's happening, that's not happening here, that is happening here, that's compounding this for us, is that home values are appreciating. That is the single biggest factor in the next 5 years for increasing people's tax bills. When I say if your asset appreciates by 3%, $10,000, $12,000, and you apply a tax rate, it's a $195 increase. When overall, the superintendent's budget and my budget, police, fire, DPW, schools, all of that together is only really increasing that tax bill $168, a very reasonable increase. And the balance of what you're seeing here outside of these 2 years, which includes Lincoln Street, 16, 17, the other part of that is home values are going back up again. If you remember prior to the recession, going back several years, we had the same issue. We'd have a reval and people's home values were jumping up, not 3%, 6%. Their tax bills were going up $700, $800. And this was happening across the state. It's not happening at that rate right now, and we're not projecting it, but again, we're only looking at the numbers and we're making reasonable assumptions. If we lost 13% and we gained back 6% over the last 2 years, is it unreasonable to think that we're going to gain back 6 to 8% over the next 5 years? I don't think it is. But if that holds true, then we're going to be seeing higher tax bill increases than we thought of otherwise. And the reason it's so important to look at this information is because when you talk to departments and you talk to citizens and you talk to employee groups, boy, we're in great financial shape. Our bond rating just got upgraded. We're putting money aside for our OPEB. We've got strong reserves. Why can't we add 10 more teachers? Why can't we add 10 more police officers and 10 more firefighters? Because we don't make those decisions in a vacuum. We make those decisions based on where we've been, assumptions about where we're going to go, the things we control, the things we mitigate, and the things that we have no control over whatsoever. I'm telling you, standing here today, that we've got factors that are going to impact our local taxes that we don't control, and that's the real estate market. And that is going to have a stronger, greater impact on what people see in their taxes, more so than what the superintendent and myself spend in the budgets. Now, I've already told you this is predicated on us having budgets that maintain services somewhere in the 3.5% to 4% range. So one thing that we might immediately say is, I don't know, is 4% budget increases over the next 4 years or 5 years? Is that realistic given these projections? We don't have to decide that today, guys. the point of this exercise is to let you peek into the future and see what we know based on the assumptions that we have. I would hope that between now and then we'll see more economic development. I'd hope that we'd see more state aid. We'll continue to do things operationally that will save us money. One of the things that the superintendent is working on and the town is pairing up with her on is we're looking at solar voltaic on all of our municipal buildings as a way to reduce operating expenses. We're negotiating with all of our unions on getting our health insurance increase down to a minimum, because if we're not spending it on health insurance, then we can handle it, we can use it to maintain our services. We need to look at our fees again. And I don't mean raising fees are not taxes. I'm talking about things like our ambulance fees that are paid for by insurance companies. Some other things like that we need to look at. So there are a number of things that we will be looking at and we'll be talking about over the next couple of years to help mitigate this. But I want you to know, and I want you to see what we know and what we see, and that is a potential. We have the ability to mitigate that. To what extent remains to be seen. But that is why when you meet with people and they want to see 10 more teachers, lower class size, more police officers, more firefighters, more librarians, when they meet with me for the budgets, I caution greatly against growing too quickly. It doesn't mean we can't do things, but we have to understand if you add that into staffing, it's going to complicate and make the problem worse. So you can still do things where you have to do them to maintain services. But if somebody requests adding 10 more staff to their department, people say, why did you spend all that money on an operational and staffing analysis of the police and fire department? I said, because these are the implications. Now, luckily, we don't need anywhere near the level of staffing that was requested. But we listened, and we responded thoughtfully, just like we will do for all requests for budget increases. But it has to be within this context. All right, wrapping up here, financial outlook. Budgets increased minimally. These assumptions don't mean that we're looking at adding 20 more staff. Regardless of the fact that we're in good financial shape, as I just said, we cannot add a lot of staff and sustain it. It's not in the cards for us. Again, we're assuming that existing unused levy capacity, if we were to follow all these assumptions, would be used up. Taxes, of course, will increase. We've got significant debt hitting. And as you know, fiscal 16 was a reval year. So 17, 18, fiscal 19 will be another reval year. So we'll make interim adjustments in those home values. We don't want to see 4 or 5% increases when we do a reval. It should be a tweaking, 3% or less. But again, the other piece here, no budget surprises. How many budget surprises did we see in the form of storms and budget cuts and over the last 5 to 7 years? So you want to make sure when people say, well, why do you have those reserves and why are you so conservative? It's because it's not unheard of. In our recent history, we have lost state aid that we budgeted on in the middle of the year, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't want to be slashing and cutting. You want to have some contingency funds to maneuver. So maybe you can backfill that with contingency funds while you renegotiate health insurance with your employees. Things like that. We want to maintain that flexibility. In conclusion, when we look forward, which has been about 8 times you've heard me say it today, we're going to continue to fund our OPEB. We have to keep doing that. We will lobby the legislature for more Chapter 90 funds so we can get back on track with our roadway projects and our pavement management plan. In terms of the 2017 budget, we want to make sure that those decisions are made in the context of all of the projections that we just talked about. It's so easy when people listen to our auditor and our bond rating and our reserves and the stuff that we're doing to think that we're just flush with cash. We're in good shape, but we're that way because we are very conservative in how we're looking at these numbers. The last piece here, we just need to continue watching these. Every year we update the assumptions. Every year we have this meeting so that everybody involved from a policy-making standpoint understands what we're facing, why we're facing it. And by the way, if you disagree with any of these assumptions, that's the kind of conversation this is designed to bring forth. If you think we're being overly conservative, or maybe some of you are sitting there thinking, maybe we're being too generous with some of these. Well, that's the type of stuff we need to talk about, and we need to modify that every year so that when we sit here and we look out 5 years, we're seeing something in that 5-year trend that we all believe we're going to be able to live with and sustain as a community. And that's the end of the presentation. I hope you found it informative. And please, by all means, I really ask that you read the overall document. I'm interested in your feedback. If you see something in there that doesn't make sense, we try to avoid acronyms and jargon whenever possible. We tend to, when we do use it, we put it in the glossary of terms in the budget. But if this doesn't make sense, if something in here doesn't make sense to you folks, then it's not going to make sense to the average person. So I need you as a sounding board to tell me, and the financial team, what do we need to modify here? And again, look at the assumptions. You tell me, are we too rosy? Are we being too bleak? By all means, that's part of this exercise. Yes, Billy.
Good presentation. When we were talking about staffing, the staffing study, when we first started doing the staffing study, how many years ago? 3 years. And then actually getting the final analysis for the police and the fire, and then when we go over this, we realize just by adding 1 or 2 more employees, like on the municipal side, how much of an impact it has over the next number of years, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years with OPEB and pensions and insurance and all that. I think the layman in town, the actual taxpayers, I don't think they really realize the impact that just one employee has over the course of, their taxes over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's why I wish more of the taxpayers could get in and kind of watch this evolving.
And that's a great point, Billy, and that's one of the reasons why we do tape it every year and we do rebroadcast it. And I know a lot of this is repetitive for you folks. You've seen it before, but I'm hesitant to leave too much out because I want that continuity in the presentation. But when you go back to, we meet with, we had the library trustees, and I'm not going to pick on them, but last year saying, why can't we add staff back? So we have to be very careful about how we add it. And one of the things that we've done is we've split positions. So we'll add 2 19-hour-a-week positions with no benefits. So there's no pension, there's no health insurance, and there's no OPEB. Well, why can't I have 1 full-time? It's harder to manage 2 part-time. Well, that's why. Two part-time people may be 1/3 of the cost of 1 full-time when you factor all that stuff in. But people want to see class size. Always, if it goes up 1 or 2 students, I know parents, and I'm the parent of 2 kids in the school system, believe me, I understand. But you start to press and say, we should just immediately start adding teachers. You say, no, if there's ways that you can adjust and deal with that to get through a bubble, then you should try to do that. Doesn't mean you never add a full-time position, but it means when you do, you better be very clear that you need it, and you better be very clear how you're going to sustain it. The other thing too is when, if I've got $60,000 of liquidity in my budget, and I'm just making up a number, 1 year I buy computers with it, the next year I upgrade software, another year I buy fire hose with it. From year to year, it moves around and you can solve needs in the various departments, right? If I use that $60,000 and I hire somebody, it's gone forever and it multiplies because that cost goes up and then it ripples through all the other. Again, I'm not saying you never do it. I'm just saying you do it after considerable study and being very clear about why you're doing it and what the implications are for the balance of your budget and the taxpayer. And that's why, we learned this when we did the operational studies on police and fire. If we just hired what people were asking for, it would have been 20 full-time people with benefits. Instead, we're probably going to wind up adding, 3 or 4 positions over as many years if we can sustain them. That's the measured approach I'm talking about. Elaine, did you have a question?
No, I just think that we should give a round of applause to the financial team.
Oh, I was going to get to them.
They do such a magnificent job, and not only do we benefit, but several communities throughout the Commonwealth seem to be benefit from their expertise. Because they give so graciously our time and their time by educating the less fortunate.
Well, you're stealing my thunder, but I want to name them
Less fortunate.
specifically for the folks at home.
The less fortunate communities.
For the folks at home, I was
They don't
going to
have
come
such
back
great
and close
assets
on
as
this.
we have.
Yes,
Oh.
exactly.
Our financial team consists of June Hubbard Ward, our finance director, Kim Foster, the assistant town administrator, and Jason Little, the town accountant. I say this all the time, that I'm the beneficiary of their hard work and their expertise. I get to stand here and present this stuff, and I get to go all around the state, but there's no way I could do this without these folks. The time that they put in, and it's just tremendous. And just to follow up on what you said, Elaine, a lot of folks may not know this at home, but the town of Northborough trains all of the new finance committee, so people like you folks across the state. If you join a finance board or committee anywhere in the state, you come to their annual conference. The town of Northborough is the ones that trains you in best practices. The most recent thing that I'm very proud of is the governor has released his Community Compact initiative, whereby the state is providing technical expertise and consultation for communities in areas like affordable housing, economic development, and finance. And he rolled this out at Holy Cross on November 12th of this year. And Northborough was asked to come in and be the model presenter for best practices in public budgeting. And for me, that was a huge honor. Now, I might have been the one that got to talk, but I was on the backs of the work that these folks over to my right had done. So the information that you have available to you in this format, in these documents, is the model of best practices that's being shown across the state, as this is where the governor's telling you, in terms of your financial management, this is where you want to be doing what Northborough's doing. To me, that's a tremendous, no, and I didn't get paid. And before anybody asks,
Yeah, we're so
And before-
that we don't need
and before anybody asks, we didn't get paid either. So, but you know, it's an honor, and I hope that folks look at that as a sort of a good seal of approval for the type of information that we have and the types of discussions that we're having, like our meeting here tonight. So I appreciate your attention, and as always, if there are any questions you have, I'm willing to meet with anybody, anytime in this community to talk about municipal finances. I love this stuff, and I know that we are doing a good job in Northborough, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it anytime.
This was the short version.
This was the short version. I only went through half of the indicators, so. Well, thank you again for your attention.